Oh, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition, a trade week edition of CrowCast Tuesday Night Live. I thought it was well worthwhile bringing in the horror movie music because it's been, it started off pretty bad, but it's ended up pretty good in terms of Crows fans. And joining me tonight to talk all about it is my usual cohorts. Peter, how are you going, Peter?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Nikki, how are you?
I'm going very well.
Donkey, I expect trouble.
Hello, Phoenix.
Hello, Donkey.
Hello, Phoenix. How are you?
I'm well, and you?
I am very, very good.
G'day to everyone on Spreaker who's joining us tonight and also on Facebook and YouTube chat. I have to regretfully report that Macca won't be joining us tonight. And I didn't have anything to do with it. I was all prepared to cop it on the chin. But unfortunately, Macca's had a prior engagement and he can't get out of it.
It's all right.
Never mind, but yeah,
I
you'll
predict
step in, Dom.
he will keep reminding us of this for the next year or so.
Yeah, probably. But look, let's not jump the gun. Let's get into some Crows news, shall we? What a week, Peter.
What a what?
I was going to start with, do we actually have some news, really?
Should we be respectful of Macca and at least just say, well, that dickhead Burton got sacked? We could at least be respectful, couldn't we?
I think the biggest news is that I need to fall on my sword, and I'm going to do it early. Really early. Well, there's been just one or two people. I've never received so many messages in my life on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot, just reminding me that I may have been wrong about my thoughts on Burton and Camporelli getting the flick, and that our esteemed colleague Macca may have been correct. And I'm quite happy.
May have been.
Not only am I happy to agree that I was definitely wrong in how I was looking at things and Macca was right, but I'm also very, very happy that it actually happened because our club is better for it. So well done, Macca. If you're listening, I'm sure he'll be listening at some stage. And well done, Donkey, too. You kept the faith, but you can all get stuffed.
Well, it's certainly more brutal than I thought it would be. I thought that it would be sideways movement. That was always my gut feel, that there would be something would happen, but it would be sideways movement. I think I had Burton as the CEO of the baseball team and Campo contracted for the new building at North Adelaide. But to be fair, to credit to the club, they've taken positive action. There were still quite a few murmurings around social media about the role of Chappie, Risciuto and Fagan in overseeing all of that. But I think that, you've got to be happy in terms of, the discontent that was there from the supporter base. It was largely directed at Brett Burton. And, that doesn't just happen out of nothing. That was almost sort of organic, wasn't it? How that grew into a tidal wave. And I think that it stems back to the press conference last year, and generally the way that he conducted himself, and also, the fact that it was quite clear that the camp was a divisive factor, and that he was quite clearly a key part of that. Tracking back to his days at Brisbane, where he tried to get them involved up in Brisbane, but they saw through it, wouldn't allow it. So anyway, there's a whole lot of things around Brett Burton, and Macca would, if he was here, would give us the rundown on that, I'm sure. But I think that was really, I think that was the body that everybody wanted, and I think that in the end, I think that there was some really interesting, little bit of rumour, and Scorpus, I noticed, was on the chat tonight. So Scorpus, how are you? He posted something really quite interesting. He doesn't normally get hold of a lot of info, but I thought it was interesting that he came across some information that there was a pretty big disconnect between the board and Brett Burton, and that he had absolutely no idea that it was coming. So it was just, I thought that was a little bit of an interesting snippet that he dropped. But anyway, I thought a really good result for the club. Forget about the other three. The fact that I think that Camporelli's moved on, I think that was a great result. And the main thing is that we can now get a little bit of clear air.
Yeah, agree 100% there, Macca. Bloody hell.
Bloody dickhead.
Yeah.
Dickhead.
No, agree, Pete. It's there's been lots of little snippets come out since, and I reckon Cara and McClure are itching to continue the dialogue for many, many days and weeks to come. But it's quite clear that the club couldn't help but get rid of those two because they were just too divisive.
And they were the two that we identified very early on, that we could see that they were the problem. And the interesting thing is that what you were talking about, that scuttlebutt, Pete, was around the fact that Burton was the one who was telling the board that everything is rosy, everything is going wonderful, we've got the right people and the right jobs. And whilst underneath it was an absolute shit show going on. And so when the report was presented to the board and that it was very obvious that Burton was the problem, the board had to make that decision. So I wonder whether there will be some changes made between those little links going on. I mean, it is supposed to be the GM too there, but a plus for me, it makes Roo not as strong in his position as he has been as that perceived kingmaker because he's stuffed up.
Yeah, I'm not buying that yet, Nick.
Of course not. I went back and had a look at. For me, it emotionally blew up the day after we lost to Carlton, and we on the cast had a bit of a big conversation about how angry and everything we were, and that's where Feeney went off and did the petition, and we all started hammering social media pretty hard. And I wrote at the time in an airport a series of tweets where things that I thought that we need to change if we're going to get any clear out. I'm just going to go through them because I'm pretty happy with where we've got to. So number one was...
Are you tooting your own horn here, Donkey?
Oh, he's been doing it all day.
Mate, well, it's not just about me, but it's about... This is all stuff that we discussed. So this is just all put down in a thing of thoughts. And this is... And we, everyone that was on social media and the Twitters and everything pushing for these changes, we're all saying very similar things. And I think by having some very clear objectives, we actually achieved a fair bit of them. So one of the things we put out there was the Crows in their current state were further away from a premiership than almost any time in their history, that we were close, but now that means we were clinging on. Number 3 was that we were stale. We had minimal list changes in the 22, and we had really conservative selection. That our club administrators had failed to deliver the best football department, and instead that we had Brett Burton and Campo, that our senior players seemed to be soft with no accountability or ruthlessness. We did think that Don was a victim, and that he was talented, but fighting through Burton, Campo and Fagan. We thought that our kids were good with, Dude, Malera, Gooch, Fogg, as they just need a crack and they weren't getting a proper crack. We called for an independent audit, a root and branch straight away. And then we also called that they're only going to respond to extreme public pressure, and that we didn't actually enjoy sort of doing this as a club, but we wanted to see changes. So that was thoughts that we'd all had at that point in time. And I think we were proven right through a lot of the reports coming out about the review about different things. We heard Nicks today talking about how we've got young players on the list that need to have their opportunity, which is really great to hear. The guys that we called out as the big problems, they got the sack. So I think we're just, whether it's correlation or causation, who knows? But I think the thoughts that we had on this cast, and it's not just me, even though I will take it all, is that we're pretty on the money, and the people that came with us helped us make that change, I reckon.
And it wasn't just our cast; it was other casts as well. But you're right, Don.
That's what I'm saying. We're all together. Yeah.
And that's what it was. It was putting that pressure on the club to realise that they really had annoyed us because we were getting that same old spin out from them, and we weren't accepting it. And there just became too much noise. It got picked up in the general media, and they got hammered from Victoria, which we know they're like sharks, and they want to come after us at any stage. And they're going to keep on with that camp for a while, especially with what's happening with Eddie. But, just let them. We are, as I said today, new era, we're moving forward.
I think that's right, Nikki, in terms of the mobilisation, and that's social media now, isn't it? And I count podcasts as a part of social media.
Yep.
And I think that we've got 3 or 4 pretty good podcasts going as a football club, because we've got a lot of people to cover. And I think that really helped between all of the casts and between Twitter and other forms of social media. I think that the message well and truly was put over. And I think also, Fleen, I think that as time's gone on, I think we spent a lot of time on the camp last year, and I don't think we were particularly popular for that. But I think that as time has worn on, I think that certainly a lot of the information we got at the time and a lot of the attention we paid to it, I think in the end I feel pretty vindicated that that was a very, very significant factor in the way things have gone, and I honestly don't think we've heard the last of it. I think that as players drift out, I think that more information will come to bear. But so I do feel fairly vindicated about that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, we spent a lot of time doing our research on collective minds and all the rest of it, and together with the information that we were receiving, and even the information that we actually got from the club, albeit some of it was a bit snake eyes, there was definitely unrest. There was definitely divisive outcomes. I mean, Cameron Ellis-Yeoman has stated as much. I had a whisper in my ear yesterday that Eddie Betts actually was so disenchanted with the club that he leveraged that disenchantment to force the club to actually fly his wife and kids to every away game last season as some form of restitution. I've heard a ton of things. I've heard that Brett Burton ran a feedback app from in amongst the players, and if they rated other players or his performance less than 65%, he asked them to put a comment with it. I mean, there's just a ton of little bits and pieces, and sure, some of it's scuttlebutt, some of it's rubbish, some of it's not quite accurate. But, oh my God, there's so much smoke that you can only imagine what the truth actually is. But the bottom line is that the club, through our efforts and Crowject and Two Crows and Sensible Crow and, all the Facebook and Twitter users got to a point where we gave the club no choice. And I think the key, Pete, for me, was that it was people that were normally fairly prone to giving the club the benefit of the doubt that actually added a lot of weight to the push for change, because it was that section of the supporter base, I guess, that also mobilised. They'd also had enough, and I think it got to the point with the club. I mean, they monitor social media and all the rest of it, as we all know, and I think it got to a point where the drums were just too loud for them to ignore.
Yeah, and from my memory of the last home game for Collingwood too, we struggled to sell the tickets and sell out the game until relatively close to the final bounce, and that's not something that would have normally happened for a Collingwood game. So I think they had a whiff of what it means for people to start voting with their feet, and it's not something they were looking forward to, I don't think.
And people walking out during the game. They were making it obvious that we weren't accepting these performances. We knew something was wrong, and we weren't going to stay there and watch it.
It's a good point you make, Donkey, because people didn't have to vote, significantly with their feet. They just had to give them a sniff.
Yeah.
And I do think there was. I was just going to say that I do think there was quite a number of people who rang up the club to cancel their memberships for the next year.
Well, I don't know whether the club can monitor switching off auto renewal, but if they are actually able to monitor how many people switched off auto renew, that would have given them a fair indication, because I reckon a fair slab of the supporter base did exactly that.
And people were also calling up the club to say exactly why they were and what they weren't happy, and they would only turn it back on if certain things happened, which included external review. People were then posting on social media about doing that and encouraging others to do so if that's how they felt.
And I seem to remember maybe something about 3 or 4 weeks ago where people were trying to cancel it, but they must have shut down the ability to cancel your auto renew.
Yeah.
And then they pretended it was the system.
Yeah. Now, look, I need to thank our sponsors, Smith Partners Real Estate up there at Golden Grove. Ryan and all the crew up there do a fantastic job for all your buying, selling and renting needs. Down to Earth Electrical for all your electrical data and air conditioning needs. Of course, Scorpus's YouTube channel, Hardware Unboxed, for all your geeky news. And last but certainly not least, everyone who has supported us via Patreon throughout the course of the season. If you want to give us some support, go to patreon.com/AFL CrowCast or click the Patreon button at aflcrowcast.com. Now, Donkey...
Yes, mate.
I've eaten my humble pie. I've sort of wiped a tear from my eye and a bit of apple from the corner of my mouth, and I've composed myself. But I'm going to say this to you, mate. It may not have been a sham review, but there's a few people that are very, very, very lucky that they were able to turn the spotlight away from themselves and directly onto the football department.
Okay.
Would you agree?
Oh, look, I think the fact that Rob Chapman hasn't gone down in this process is a disgrace and a stain on his leadership. But unfortunately, his leadership resembles a toddler's bib, and there's already a lot of stains all over it. I mean, we've talked about before about the 10 years of dross served up under Chapman. Basically, and you think of the handover, he sort of came in the Trig reign. He's drunk the Trig Kool-Aid. He's continued the Trig legacy ever since. It's about cover-up, mediocre performances, shushing protected culture, and all of the likes. Had a bit of business success for a bank, but apparently doesn't work for him anymore, and spends a lot of time with the club. Look, I just think that the time is now, Chappie, and you should have fallen on your sword, because at the end of the day, Tippettgate, appointing Neil Craig, only making the finals 4 times out of the last 10 years, the Balfour stuff that went along with Tippett, all the players that have walked out, the camp happening under your watch, and you first of all pretending nothing had happened, then the considered cover-up, and then not being aware of your football department, even when the pressure was on. You should not be that club anymore, Rob Chapman. I agree 100%, Phoenix.
Yeah, so I think there was... if you go back to the beginning when they declared that the club was going to do an external review, it was a top-to-bottom review, root and branch, and then the rhetoric changed after 2 or 3 days and became a review of the football department. Now, I know Dunstall came out and gave Chapman a bit of a glowing report, but we got to remember that the board and the executive and the non-football sections of the club were not part of this review. So Piggy's assessment of Chappie would have been just basically based on his rapport with Chapman while he was at the club, and not necessarily looking deeply into his actions. Chappie's got off very lightly, no doubt about it. As you reeled off all those things, Donkey, 100% accurate. And the bloke is Teflon, and he needs to go. And the sooner he goes, the better. And I think he's put a time frame on it, and I reckon a large majority of the supporter base are going to hold him to that. The other one is Mark Rashudo. I've got mixed feelings about Roo, because on the one hand, he stepped in the last time the club needed a bit of a refresh. We weren't going anywhere with Sanderson, and I think he lamented that we were just pedestrian and mediocre, and he came in and shook things up. Obviously brought Phil Walsh in, and with Walsh he came a couple of other really good assistants, and a bit of a rejuvenation of the club. I think Roo's biggest downfall is probably a touch of arrogance in terms of him thinking that perhaps he knows best. He placed a lot of trust and support into his mate, and let's not forget Bird was part of Rue's wedding party, I think, or the other way around. So they're close mates, and I think having Rashido as a dotted line report for Brett Burton was fraught with danger from start to finish, and I think it's caused a lot of trouble. I also heard from the same little source yesterday that Rue actually stepped into our captaincy selection last year, which I think probably is indicative of the power and the influence that Rue, rightly or wrongly, wields around the club, or has wielded around the club for a considerable amount of time. So I think, I don't know about Rue.
No, I'm with you on that one, Fiend. I'm sort of a bit 50-50. It's hard, isn't it? Because such a decorated player and such a a loved player, and there was that great optimism when he came to the board, and when he brought Walsh, and it was a period of great optimism in the club, and we all thought that Rue was going to be the one to no nonsense and take us forward. And I think that he has he's pinned his colours to Brett Burton, who was as you pointed out earlier, Nicky, was the conduit. He had the position, really a conduit between the board, which by representation was Rashido, was the football director. And so, he was an incredibly high position, Brett Burton, and he was the conduit between the football department and the board. Mm-hmm. And so Rashido, he pins his colours to that mast, and as you quite rightly point out, they're very close friends, and there was really didn't seem to be any kind of extensive search process to fill that position once David Noble left. And the chalk and cheese, those two.
Well,
and
how do you reckon the players felt about him, Pete? Because as I mentioned, Rue stepped in last year into the captaincy nomination, and my understanding is that the players voted overwhelmingly for Sloaney to be captain, and at the last minute, Rashido stepped in and insisted, essentially, that Tex be retained, and that as a result we would have dual captains. So
it's a bit explosive.
Yeah, that's my understanding. And I don't know whether you're endearing yourself as the director of football. I don't know whether you're endearing yourself, and I'm going to wrap all that up in allegedlys, but that's what I've heard. You're not endearing yourself as football director to your playing group by doing things like that, I wouldn't have thought.
No, absolutely not. And it wouldn't be lost in the player group that they were friends, those two.
Yeah.
And also wouldn't be lost on the playing group that Tex is part of that whole, inner circle, the old circle of trust. So that would, that can't go down well, and it's got to be part of, we're talking about a whole range of reasons for fractures and relationship breakdowns at that football club. And look, we that was some information we got last year, Fane. The fact that there's some very, very cliquey groups there, and if you're not part of that sort of real that cliquey crowd, then you can fill on the outer.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think if nothing else, there'll be a break point between the coach and the director of footy, because you would imagine that whoever the new footy ops GM is, they will make sure that he's not a club man. I'd be shocked if he was anyone that's had any association with the club administratively or even from a playing perspective before. I think they'll go pretty hard at trying to get someone from outside, and hopefully that will add a little bit of rigour to the chain of command there in terms of the football department. But we're probably dwelling on the negative, and I guess we've done our little post-mortem now. The only one we haven't spoken about, I guess, is Campriali. By all reports, neither Bird or Campo were particularly happy about leaving, and Burton in particular, I think, wasn't very happy about holding the can for the lack of performance over the last 24 months. But that's a lesson learnt for Brett, because when you're in the top seat, the buck stops with you. But Campo, I think, irrespective, had probably done his dash at the club anyway, we all thought.
Yeah. Look, Campo, was clearly really loved by the guys. And one thing I noticed, he spoke at a breakfast in Darwin a couple of years ago, and he talked about how he loved the boys and he felt a really special bond with them and all that sort of stuff. And at the time, I thought it was really sort of folksy and actually quite endearing. But we were winning then. And what it's sort of really evident was that his folksy and sort of bond seemed to be with people that played at the club, in the Craig Sanderson era. If you're a young player coming through, then he had that really good bond, and you got the gigs. And I, would Brodie Smith have played ball bid to full time? If that hadn't happened, would Rory Sloane know how to break a tag if he hadn't been around for the last 5 years? Like, there's a few. I mean, our midfield has had pretty good cattle without ever being a dominant midfield, and he's had the levers basically the whole time. So I just don't think I think that he's going to be the difference we see on the field. Like, Burton will be some difference, but I think Campo being gone will be the difference we see on the field next year.
Yeah, I've no doubt, Doc. Here, look, there's one thing that has always bothered me about Campo, and a little bit more left field, I suppose, than actual just sort of tactics on the field. I think that if you look at all assistant coaches, you can look at their CV and you can sort of see a general trajectory where they're all looking to, head towards sort of, the senior coaching role. And, Mathew Nicks is a, classic example where you can see that he's gone in as an assistant coach. He's had the defence, the midfield, the forward line. He's then progressed to a senior assistant. He's then, gone to another club as a senior assistant, and now he's landed with us. And I just never, ever thought that Campo was ever on that kind of trajectory. And so that always said to me that there was a lack of, I guess, hunger to succeed and to, to push and to, get to the top job. And I think that for me, that was a bit of an indicator of where Campo was at. I think he was pretty comfortable in that role. I know he had a few different roles, but he was still at the one club for he survived. What was it, 4 or 5 coaches?
Yeah, 4 coaches.
5.
Oh,
5, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I just couldn't see any kind of trajectory that would align with that real sort of steely ambition to push yourself forward, and in so doing, take a team forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And with that came the fact that we could see, watching closely over the past couple of years, that midfield hadn't changed. That they never really tried anything different. Campo just had his one way of doing it, and that was it. And even when somebody else came in to do the midfield, it still had the Campo stamp on it, very much so. There was not a lot of differential happening that needed to happen. And it was just too stagnant. And like you said, Pete, those other coaches move around, and the fact that he never did, that he just stayed in this one spot. I can understand early on because he still had his business here, and there's only 2 clubs he could be a part of, and so he became part of the furniture, and it was an old smelly couch that really needed to be moved on.
Yeah, and the fact that I think it also it's indicative again of the mentality of the club, because I don't think many clubs would have a coach that, in any capacity, a line coach or a senior assistant, who's outlasted so many coaches and been at the club for such a period of time. And, by all reports, Camporelli's contract was actually extended this year. So just imagine the payout. But it just shows that even as early as mid-season, we still had confidence in Camporelli to continue. Just mind-boggling. And as you say, Nick, on field, there was just utter stagnation. His techniques and his strategies weren't keeping pace with the modern game. You didn't hear about Camporelli going off and studying other sports or doing any work, any sort of extracurricular type stuff to gain more knowledge. He just turned up at the club. He did his job. He did it the same way, and people toe the line. And there's been Mick Godden basically confirmed during the season that got to the point with Bryce Gibbs that Camporelli and Bryce couldn't even speak with each other. And that Bryce had to have a direct line with Pike now, and we all saw what sort of season Bryce had. So, we're always thankful for Camporelli for what he did for the club during the Phil Walsh saga, but certainly his last few years at the club, I think were wasted years for the Crows. So what now, Pete? We got Mathew Nicks.
Excuse me. Yeah, look, and sorry you caught me there. An interesting appointment, and I think that my gut feel is that he always had his nose in front for the fact that he's a local and that has worked at Port Adelaide and understand. I think that was a big tick for him, that he understands the football landscape here. But I was fortunate enough to be off work today, and I did sit down and have a listen to the live feed of the press conference. And look, it's a honeymoon period, and we always love the sound of a fresh voice, but he made some really big hits in some of the comments that he made. And I think that Mathew Nicks, I suspect, struck a chord with a lot of supporters today, with some of the things that he was saying. It was pretty basic stuff, but I think it was stuff that we all wanted to hear. And I think his references to, I think he'll probably be forever known as for the bringing the family back together, which was a really a nice quote he was able to get out there. But there was some other stuff as well, which was I thought really, really good. I mean, I'll give you these quotes. That's the goal for us, to bring the family back together, that we've all got each other's backs, and results will look after themselves. And then this was one that struck a chord with me as well. The main thing from our point of view is to get back to playing the footy that our supporters will be proud to come and watch. And he mentioned the press conference when they asked him about results next year, and he said that really, results, well, who can say, but he said all I'm going to be aiming to do is that win, lose or draw, that when Adelaide supporters go home from the ground, they can be proud of what they saw, and that they know that was 100% effort. And for anybody who was at games like the Showdown, the second Showdown this year, and looking at that Carlton game, and we all know there was no effort in those games, or there wasn't adequate effort, and so they're the kind of things that we're going to be looking to see. I thought it was interesting that he mentioned he made a lot of reference to his time at Sydney. Which was interesting, and we all forget. Culture. Yeah, we kind of forget that, don't we? We think, he's only been at Port and GWS, but we forget that he had 175 games at a premiership at Sydney in 2005, and
during a period of real strong team culture at that footy club as well.
Incredibly strong culture, yeah. And so he referenced that a lot today.
Yeah, just on that, Pete, he mentioned that when he went to Sydney in '96, and they were in a similar stage of what the Crows kind of are now. They've had that bit of a down, and they were starting to build up. They were building a team. They were building a young team, and that's when that whole culture development was starting to take place. So I think that's why he was very heavily leaning on that, and he did reference the GWS culture this year, which I think he had a lot of influence on, just listening to him today.
And it was simple stuff, Nikki, wasn't it? It was very simple stuff. It's a culture of we're going to put other people first.
Yep.
You've got each other's back. You've got really simple, really basic, almost like home cooking. Do you know what I mean? It was just really simple stuff.
Yeah. And on that one word he mentioned over and over again, family.
Yeah.
He mentioned family a lot.
Well, sorry, go on.
No, you go. I've had a say. Go on, you go, mate.
No, all I was going to say is my sort of indirect involvement with Nicks is when he was coaching at Scotch, when he came back to South Australia. And Scotch have never been a terribly powerful college footy team, have they? And Leddy was playing for Scotch, and my lad was playing for Sacred Heart. And it was probably the strongest that Scotch College have ever been. And I know for a fact that a lot of the lads that played in that first 11 loved him. And it was all about building relationships and developing relationships with players. And obviously, it's any man and his dog can see that there needs to be some healing amongst the playing group. And it sounds like Mathew Nicks might be the guy to do that. You know, whether he's got enough tricks tactically, football-wise, I think some of that will come down to his own ability, and I think some of it will come down to who we put around him.
Yeah. I thought what was interesting as well was...
Yeah, I was just going to say, just on that, Phoenix, it was Rory Laird actually tweeted out the picture of him sitting next to Nicks as his coach from the Scotch College days. So I thought
I replied.
that was...
I replied saying teacher's pet.
Yep. But the other thing on that is his relationship building and his healing. What I really noticed in the press conference is when he got a couple of questions from the journos and he would turn it back on them, and we saw his cheeky side to him and those comments, and he was making the journos laugh. He was getting them on side with him, and to me that's what you saw as the way he does some of his relationship building, because he was doing that with journos. But also the other thing was that he mentioned he knows he's been ready to coach for a couple of years, but he hasn't applied for any other jobs because they weren't the right fit. But as soon as this one came along, he went, I'm applying for that because that is my job. I can do exactly what they need, and and where they are is exactly what I need in order to coach how I want to coach, which I thought was very interesting. You compare that to some of the other coaches that are around who apply for a lot of jobs and don't seem to get it. He waited for the right one.
So I guess the proof will be in the pudding with Mathew, but it's nice to have. What?
Proof of the pudding's in the eating.
Thank you, Dumpy. It's one of my pet hates.
What about Peter's mental health there, Pete?
No, the proof of the eating will be in the pudding. I'm just kidding. But you know, like I was saying, it's nice to have someone in the seat. There's a couple of important seats to be filled in that coach's box. You know, the early word is that the impression I got from his presser with Fagan today or Fagan's release or whatever it was, I saw a tweet saying that he'll have the opportunity to bring in one senior assistant. So it looks like we may retain everyone else except Gampo at this stage in the coach's box.
He did say, so there's been a couple of interviews with him online, and they were obviously done before the main presser happened, because at the main presser he had actually spoken to Brad Crouch, whereas all the interviews online mentioned that he hadn't been able to get in contact with him yet. And he did talk about that, and what he did say was that he was going to sit down with them. He reiterated that whole spiel he has about caring for everybody else and doing what's best for everybody else. And so that's what he was going to sit down and have a chat with the others about, then sort out where the best fit for everyone is, keeping in mind of that, and then having a discussion with them about what kind of senior assistant they need. Do they need somebody who is actually an experienced coach, or do they need somebody young, which I thought was quite interesting. So I think that's very up in the air with how that's going to be, but he's talking about working with the coaching panel as to what they need as a collective group, not what he needs, but what they need. So he's walking the walk already.
What's your feel, Pete, in terms of the coaching box?
Look, I think that he comes across as very much the relationship builder. So that's his go, and I think that that's probably what's apart from the fact that the understanding of the landscape. I think that my gut feeling is that probably was a really big selling point, and I can just imagine him sitting there, talking about the implementation, of the whole sort of Bloods culture style. And I thought it was interesting in the interview that he borrowed a lot from his Sydney days. So how he is tactically, I'm not sure. But I wonder whether that, and I think that you might have alluded to this, that he wins the job sort of very much on his capacity to bring people together and to implement, cultural change like that. And I wonder whether that perhaps opens the way for a more senior assistant. But the difficulty with that, of course, will be that most of those kind of guys will be all signed up at this point. So I imagine that guys that would be of interest, the names that would fall off of our tongues would be probably mostly contracted and may not be able to be released other than for a senior coaching position.
Which I reckon sets up perfectly for Mark Stone, in my opinion. I reckon he's almost a Monty to get a job in the Adelaide coaches box next year, because despite the fact that he's never been a full-time coach of an AFL club, he's got a lot of experience at 3 different clubs, including Sydney, I reckon, when Nicks was actually playing, Must have been close if there was no crossover. But obviously Stone's also been in WA and then he's done what he's done at the Bays. But given the contract situation of 99% of these available assistants, Pete, and given Stone's background and his experience and his reputation as being a hard but fair communicator and another bloke that's very much about building relationships, he might be a very good foil for Mathew in that box next year.
Depending how he is tactically. One question I was going to put to all of you, and because I don't know the answer to this, and you might not know the answer either, but we know that assistants will have a get-out clause to take a senior coaching position. Would somebody who is not in a senior assistant role, would they, do you think, have a clause that would allow them to take a job to move up to a senior assistant role?
I think there is. I think it's you kind of can't move across, but you can move up, and that will be seen as a move up. So there is a possibility there from just the general discussion I've heard of others talking about. But I kind of like the idea of Matt Stone, and there's been a few little rumblings about him.
How is he? I mean, we know, again, he's in that. It sounds to me, and look, I don't know from a bar of soap, and I don't follow the Bays, but it sounds to me like he's perhaps more of a relationship builder. Is he? Is he the kind of strategic and game analyst that we can supplement Nicks with?
Well, as DSG's put in here, he was stoppage coach at Sydney from 2007 to 2011. Now, if you're doing something like stoppages, then that is all to do with tactics. And looking at what he's done with Glenelg this year, and particularly in that final against us, he's quite tactically nous. Even if it is at SNFL level, he was going up against AFL trained players and coaches. So,
well, wasn't he Walsh's replacement or predecessor at West Coast? I think he had a strategic role. I think he had a strategic role at West Coast. If anyone on chat can look that up, I've got enough windows open, but I have a feeling he had a strategic role at West Coast.
Which makes sense for that stoppage coach. That's another step up. And then working and turning around Glenelg this year as a head coach, he's done very well.
I don't know who else there'd be in the frame, and there hasn't really been any chatter about it, has there?
Well, I guess I don't think Craig McRae is a senior assistant. I don't think Adam Kingsley. I'm not sure if he's a senior assistant at Richmond. I don't think someone like Lenny Hayes would be a senior assistant. I think that Lenny Hayes is at GWS, isn't he?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess, and that was what I was alluding to before. You could get that level that kind of promotes into that kind of role. So the other one left, of course, is, well, there's 2 positions left, isn't there, created out of the review, and that's the people and culture, and then you've got the football manager. So there's a couple of big roles to fill.
And he said he will have some input regarding the football, the general football manager, and he did refer to it as the most important position in the club. So, and the fact that he's already had some discussions with Fagan about that role, even though he's only been officially appointed. But I think there was some of that stuff coming through in the presentations. So he did 3 presentations or interviews, and 2 of them were pretty much him just presenting to the panel. And then they said the third one was on the weekend, was just having a general chat about football and everything else. And that's what really solidified it for them. But I think he's had a bit of a chat already, I suspect.
A bit of noise been about Mark Choco Williams in that role. I've seen some plenty of smoke about that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it, to be honest. He just strikes me as a very divisive character, and I know that he's very good with the young lads. But it seems to me every role that he's had, it's ended up being toxic. It starts off great and then goes south, and I don't think Mark likes to go down without a fight. And I think that might be a bit problematic. So I'm not sure. And plus, I don't think he likes the club.
Nah, he's dumped too much shit on us. The bullshit about being tied naked to trees and all that other stuff, which hasn't been substantiated anywhere except for Mark Williams' saying. I mean, I could be wrong, but I haven't. And it's not that I believe everything the club says about the club by any stretch, but that just seemed to be one of those ones where some people were just jumping on and giving a kick in the guts because they could. So, you can he might bring some good things, and he's clearly got a good football brain and a lot of passion and energy, and he would be a disruptor of any remnants of a boys' club, or go down fighting it. But I think there's probably some good people out there that don't come with the same amounts of baggage.
Well, Podsy Adelaide's obviously one, isn't he?
Yeah, but just for me with Williams is that I see some similar traits in him that was in Burton. That was the problem, which is that arrogance. And I know the only way to go, and I think we've had that. It's been a problem. They need to go in a different direction, because you can compare that to somebody like Neil Baum, who's been successful wherever he's pretty much gone. It's a very much you've got to be strong, but there's also that politician role. And that's something that Williams cannot do.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be happy with Williams, to be honest. But there isn't a huge amount of candidates. Podsy Adley, as I've just mentioned, has sort of been bandied around both for that role and also the culture role. And I think without knowing Pods out of football to an extent, just by virtue of the fact that he's running AFL Max and he's been able to get that off the ground, and he's had a couple of other successful ventures, he's obviously got a little bit of business acumen. And
his first role outside, well, when he was playing, he had an outside business which was all around leadership and workplace development within businesses. So it kind of fits within that leadership and culture role.
Yeah. So I think
left field candidate.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Donkey McGee.
I was going to say left field candidate for me for the leadership and culture is an aging, but hopefully still got a couple more years in her, Erin Phillips. She's played Opals in Olympic basketball. She's played WNBA. She's been a part of a double successful team here. Obviously knows what good culture and things are. I reckon to be just a little left field one. Won't ever happen, but I reckon it'll be fun.
Well, I'm going to put my sexist 2 bob's worth in there, Donk, and say that I think it's a role that's almost made for a female. I think in general, I think within the culture of a football club, I think a female as part of that mix would just add a different dimension and a little bit of an emotional side. And I don't think it's a bad idea at all that you mentioned there, actually. Jenny Williams has been another one that's been chucked up.
It's working with both the men's and the women's team. So you need somebody who can actually work across both of those teams who have very different cultures right now, we know. That one's coming from a place of we get to play something we never thought was ever going to be our opportunity, and we're grabbing it with both hands and running with it, as opposed to a group that this is a job for them and that they've been aiming to be drafted and play in this job. They still do have a passion for the game, but it's not quite the same passion.
I think I'm going to echo what you're saying. If to play, there's a lot of mummies boys that play AFL footy because they're millennials and they've come through the system and they've been sheltered and they've been in systems and everyone's done everything from the whole way through. Whereas if you're playing WAFL right now, especially if you're a senior player, you've gone through a pretty hard wicket to get to it on the ground in the first place. There's not been the pathways laid out in front of you. You've had to really, really want it. And, that's when you're coming at it from those two different angles, that hunger can be something that's, you just want to make sure that's in people.
Now, David Sykes is making some good contributions on Facebook. Thanks for joining us on Facebook, David. He's given me a little bit of Mark Stone's background. So 6 seasons as the Dockers stoppage coach. Before that's previous to Glenelg. So he's been involved with blokes like Nat Fyfe, etc. Before that, he worked as the stoppage coach and opposition analyst at West Coast under Worsfold from 2003 to 2007, and then later at Sydney 2008 to 2010. So 3 very strong roles, to be honest.
Yep, no, I couldn't. You couldn't fault that, particularly in terms of strategic requirements, and so. Given the fact that, given the contractor situations, he might come across as that kind of, more senior, older style kind of person, I suppose, if you want to put it like that. A bit of more of a father figure, I suppose, as well as having the technical expertise. So it may be something that's attracted.
Yeah. Now, David's also, in regards to the current conversation, he's put forward someone called Lisa Alexander. Now, I don't know who that is. Nikki, do you?
No, but I'll look her up.
I've just asked David who she is, so hopefully he drops a comment in shortly, but I don't know who she is.
Netball.
Okay. Yeah, so
she was Australian netball coach.
There you go. I wouldn't be averse to a female in the role, but obviously, in that cultural role, I hope they've got a mandate across not only the football department, but also across the club in general. Because I still think there's going to be some lingering cultural issues that will take a little bit longer than just a quick sweep of the broom.
Well, I think in general, folks, I think that, you've got to, sometimes you've just got to bottom out, don't you? And whilst we didn't bottom out on the premiership table, I feel that we sort of kind of bottomed out as a club. And I think that, from the ashes, you can only climb back up again, can't you? And I think that, like a lot of supporters, I think that's where I feel that we're at now. We're at that point where we just feel that there's a little bit of clear air, and that we can start to climb up. And personally, and I've, as you know, Fane, I've been on this wagon for probably the last, certainly this year, and that's that. I have great excitement for what we've got running around in the SNFL and what we had this year. And I think that, if we've got a coach who's got a mandate to, to play those kids and to, have kids like Chase Jones and Ned McHenry as part of their part of the setup, then I think we can bounce back. I really do.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? And I think the players will be excited too. You'd know from your sporting days, all of you, that a new environment, a new coach, a new program, it gets you up and about. It gives you a chance. It opens up opportunities for you. Generally speaking, when a new coach comes in, all bets are off and everyone's got to prove themselves all over again. So you'd expect that pre-season training this season will be quite competitive. The only other person I guess we haven't touched, or the group I guess we haven't touched on yet, is the fitness department. There was mention that there are going to be some small changes. I wouldn't mind betting that a bit of a role reversal happens with Steve Saunders and Matt Haas, and Matt Haas might quietly find himself out of the club over the course of the next 12 to 24 months. Would that be fair?
I think so, particularly with Fagan talking about going over that soft cap. I mean, there's going over it and then really going over it. And so it might be that hence why there's not going to be too many changes around the assistants, is that because they wouldn't be on a lot of money because they're very new for most of them, like with Matner and Godden, etc. But those changes in the fitness department, it could be that rollback on some of that spending, which sees possibly Haas spending less time. And then that will eventually get rolled over into the next year, where you kind of take another little hit, but it's not as bad because you've mitigated it in the previous year. Fingers crossed, that's what I think is possibly happening, but we won't really know for a while.
No, so I guess it's a wait and see brief now over the next couple of weeks. You'd imagine that there might be one or two more announcements between now and the draft night. So I guess we should turn our attention for the next 15, 20 minutes or so on what's been happening in trade week, quote unquote. They call it trade week, but nothing much happened for most of the week.
Oh my God. And it feels like trade, 14 lifetimes. How boring and slow has it been?
Well, I feel like wherever the Adelaide office is, where trade week's taking place, I feel like there must be, those little signs and there's little cardboard signs everywhere saying with a little arrow that says garage sale, and that's all pointing to Justin Reid, and he's running the garage sale at the moment because they're just flying out the door. We've got bloody. What did Huey Greenwood go for today? A future third and a future fourth.
Yep.
I know that will relate to, stockpiling points for NGA selections next year. But then you've got what Source went for a late fourth, which I think ended up being flipped for Billy Frampton.
Yep.
Eddie Betts went for a fourth next year. So we seem to be stockpiling a bit for next year. Which is getting points, accumulating points, which is fine. What do we think of Billy Frampton?
Yeah, well, just for those listeners perhaps not in the know so much with next year's stuff, we've got potentially Borlace and Luke Edwards to bid on, which would be the reason why we're stockpiling points, you would imagine.
And there's a rumour of there's a third one we're kind of slightly trying to hide as well. So they might in our next generation academy.
Yeah.
So it could be 2 or 3. That we've got to try and have picks stockpiled for in case we get big.
Yep. Pete, Frampton, I don't mind it. I think it's a pretty cheap pick. I think we needed some insurance for the Berg in case he doesn't quite come on. I still have a sneaking suspicion they might actually, if Frampton shows any form, they might be tempted to reintroduce Himmelberg to centre half back. So I don't mind it for a bag of chips.
We essentially turned a 31-year-old ruckman that had fallen off the cliff for a 23-year-old version, who's more mobile, can clunk a contested mark. He might be able to teach Himmelberg how to do it. And I know Pete's got a bit of a problem with his aggression, but his aggression's very similar to what Fogg does. I just kind of fear for every other SNFL team that comes up with those two roaming in the forward line together. It'll be just basically, as a defender, just run away.
Oh, look, I haven't got a problem in the sense that, as Fiend points out, it's a packet of chips, and so if it's a packet of chips, then that's fine. But I think that you have to remember that he's played 3 games in 5 years. And so,
that's all right. I mean, he's on a similar timeline to Himmelberg.
He's insurance and all the rest of it, and that's fine. He's a thug. And so if they can try and get that out of him a little bit, everyone wants to see aggression, and that's fine. But it would be great if just for occasionally he would actually show aggression at the ball rather than taking cheap shots and getting himself suspended. So if we can get the cheap shots and the thuggery out of him, then he might well be. But this general excitement that there seems to be about it's going to be great because he's really aggressive. He's a thug. And he will just, if he keeps playing the way he's playing, he'll just end up being suspended left, right, and centre. And so, not my type of player, not my cup of tea. Don't like him one little bit, but he's on our list, and so we give him support.
Well, we did say that we were far too vanilla, Pete. I
think the best part about this was actually his dad's response on Facebook that he no longer has to pretend to barrack for the power.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
because if people aren't aware, Billy Frampton, he's WA born, but he's a mad Crows supporter, and he always has been because his father was. So he's always supported the Crows, and they can't wait to see him in the Crows jumper. So that gave us a bit of a giggle today.
Yeah, I don't mind Billy. Well, I'm less perturbed about the thuggery, Pete. Some of that's probably environmental, to be honest. You put on those stupid prison bars and anything happens.
No. Jenny Williams gets very upset if you call them prison bars.
I don't care. Wharf pylons then.
Yeah, she had a go at Port Adelaide for calling them that.
Yeah. It's disappointing that we couldn't get more for Huey. I think in a different situation we probably could have, but let's not forget that Gold Coast had number 1 pick in the preseason draft, and whilst no one ever uses it, the threat's still there, isn't it?
Yeah, true.
So we might. The one that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out tomorrow is the Alex Keith one. Reedy's already tried to put something together that the Bulldogs have knocked back. Since then, St Kilda have gone pretty hard on a couple of Port lads in Dougal Howard and Paddy Ryder. So it's going to be quite interesting to see. There's a few trades left to go. There'll be a mad dash, as there always is, at 1 minute to the death knock, and then Geelong will come in at 25 past and put in a late trade, and it'll be allowed.
What about JJ Fiend? Where's he going?
Oh, I think Collingwood. That's the whisper.
I'm not sure anymore because they got Darcy Cameron from Sydney, so they've got a younger backup ruck.
Yeah.
So why do they need JJ for?
Well, are they confident about
goals.
Cox?
Yeah. JJ's an instant upgrade on Cox, and they are in a premiership window, and if they can get him to kick goals, take marks and kick goals, then they've got what they need. They're not going to rely on him as much as we did, because they're going to have some guns like Joey and Stevenson's running around his feet. So I think that I agree with your feet. That's where he's going.
I think the only other place he could end up is Essendon, potentially, particularly if Joey Danaher makes his way to Sydney.
And he's still he's still got a lot of links with Essendon, and that's the one place who would accept him back, even though he's been mouthing off.
Yeah.
And I think that's done him a disservice, that not many clubs are interested in having a player who will leak to the media.
Look, I don't think that's the case, Nikki, to be honest. I think that the clubs know that we want to get rid of him, that we don't want him on our list, that we're carrying a big salary, and they'll wait until the death, and they'll throw some stupid pick at us, and we'll just take it because we can. I think you said that last week, Peter, that the first club that blinks, is at a disadvantage. So I reckon he'll go late and he'll go cheap, and we'll be glad to see the back of him for as less amount of salary as we can.
Yeah,
I agree. He'll go, and hopefully hopefully that we get something decent for Alex Keith. But he's one that if it falls over, it falls over. It wouldn't bother me to keep him, but you would think that they'll push it through somehow.
I 100% agree with you, Pete. I was just thinking about, in terms of a negotiation strategy, I would be holding out right to the end, and then I'd be saying to Alex Heath, if this falls over, we will look after you, because at the end of the day, Alex Heath, he's good. He'll be really handy for us. He'll play well. We're not going to be under any salary cap pressure now. Let's pay, let's hold him, and not buckle to the Bulldogs, because I just don't think they're not bargaining in good faith, so they can go get fucked.
No, they're not. And you don't make your competitor stronger by folding. And Keith will make them quite a bit stronger. They're contesting with us for, around that kind of possible same area of, trying to make finals and going that little bit further. Why would you give a player like that to them on a platter that they're willing to pay a lot of money for. They value him at that price. They need to pay up what that price is worth. And if they're not going to do it, we've said we're happy to keep him.
Yeah,
and
dead
he
set
is
right.
happy to stay.
Dead set right, Nick. He's a required player. He's a contracted player. They want to prize him out of the club. They've got to be prepared to pay overs. That's how it works.
Yeah. Everyone's smelling blood at the moment, and they're trying to milk an opportunity. And we've drawn a line in the sand, and we just got to push back. Otherwise we keep getting bent over and bent over. So you can make an argument about Greenwood being able to go to the PSD and RFA and all that sort of stuff, but there's and that we get the points anyway. But I just think we need top end talent. We need that pick 13. We need to be taking guys at the top of the draft. And I don't think there's any acceptable circumstance where we accept anything less than that.
Well, couldn't agree more, Docky.
Yay! Hey!
Hi, folks.
Welcome aboard, Macca.
That's what I am, and I really don't care.
I just had to play that, Macca. How you going?
Full of whitey and a couple of drinks, and the world's pretty nice.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, you were right. I was wrong. Piss off. I've already fallen on my sword.
You have you? I want to make sure you have.
I don't remember it, Macca. Maybe you should ask them to do it again.
Yeah, you can ask me.
Well, somebody's asking me to say something about the dickhead, but I'll quote what was put on my Twitter account: "Ding dong, the dickhead's dead."
Hey!
Yeah, sorry. Back to where you were.
Well, the other thing I thought was interesting in the trades with what's been going on was the fire sale at Port. The fact that they got rid of Dougal Howard and how ropeable that made so many Port fans. They got rid of Howard and Ryder to St Kilda. They did get some nice draft picks out of St Kilda for it, but losing, that's...
they downgraded from 10 to 12. And
then 18.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, they didn't get rid of Howard. Howard left. Let's not forget that Dougal Howard was on the first year of a 3-year contract and very much a required player. He got the hell out of Dodge, and it's all because, well, if you listen to the Power supporters, it's all because Hinkley decided to play him as Westhoff Mark II, and he's out of there. He's out of there. So they're in Porter in trouble because they have lost a very integral part of their spine for the next 5 to 10 years.
I'm with you there, Fiend, because he's actually a very good player, a very good defender, and because they lack a forward, they tried to make him into a forward, but at the same time they turned him from being a good player into a very average player and then dropped it, which is it's very much like you've got a very good salesman. So you want to make him sales manager, and it's beyond his capabilities, and then you sack him. But the problem lies with Port, not with him.
And the fact that there's rumours about Ollie Wines, your captain's actively looking around.
Yeah, and that doesn't come from nowhere either. Sam Schultz in the Facebook chat asks a very good question. What do we do with pick 4? Take it to the draft table?
Yep.
I think that's what's happening, isn't it? I don't think anything's going to happen now.
Well, you've got live trading.
Yeah, there's live trading, but there's also still pick swaps to go. So even though player trading ends tomorrow night, there's still, I think, another week or something they can still trade picks back and forth. But there's a very interesting little thing. See what goes on with us between us and Melbourne and GWS.
Well, that's right.
Because the green pick, who's the academy player for GWS, who the fact that Sydney has met with him and we have met with him and his family, and we are apparently very keen on Green, but GWS don't want anybody to bid on him because they also want another player. They want to hold on to their other top 10, first round draft pick. So I think there'll be some interesting shenanigans.
But where would the dream be likely to be bid at? At what level would he be bid on at?
He could be bid at. Well, he could be bid at 3 by Melbourne or 4 by us.
Is he that good?
Well, the word is that he's the third best player in the draft.
So yeah.
Well, if we don't go to the draft with it, I mean, obviously I think this won't happen. But to me, I would be very tempted to trade Brad Crouch, and even though I've been a supporter of his all year, I would be trying to get out of Gold Coast.
What's that got to do with pick 4? You come in here and you mess things up again, Macca.
Yeah, no, Brad Crouch had pick 4, trying to get and maybe something else, trying to get pick 1 and
no, we're not getting. We're not getting one or two. We're not getting one or two. The only. It's interesting that the Brad Crouch stuff has not gone away.
I know it hasn't. That's why I talked it.
But I reckon Brad Crouch is the lever to get Pete. Your mic's scratching. I think it's you or Nikki. It's the lever to get Lukosius and a later first, like Lukosius and 15 or something like that from Gold Coast. I don't think you're going to get 1 or 2.
Well, that was other suggestions I was going to suggest with pick 4. Would you give pick 4 for Lukosius and pick 15?
Well, I would, but it's not going to happen. But I would be. I'd quite happily give over 4 for Lukosius, no problem at all. It just won't happen. That's all.
Yeah, well, I mean, with Nicks now signed on, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Bradley Crouch over the next 48 hours. Because, he wants $1 million over 5 or $1 million per year for 5, which is obviously not worth and obviously not going to get. But we certainly might give him $750 and front load it a bit, given we'll have a bit of spare coin. Just to take him out of calculations for free agency, but it doesn't take him out of calculations for a trade, in year 2 or 3. I don't know. I mean, you all know my thoughts on Brad Crouch. I'd happily trade him, not because he's a terrible player, but just because I think we can probably do better with we can maximise his value right now, I think, and we may not get another opportunity to do so.
Well, if you knock out the Gold Coast, any of those possibilities, the only way I would trade pick 4, and this is something we, as the plebs out here, we don't know, whether Ogilvy may see people at 7 or 10 or later positions than that, which he considers even better than the ones earlier that are likely to go earlier. So the possibility is there, the possibility to split pick 4. And Nicky was talking about GWS, for example. I don't know whether they've got the material to do it, but would you rather keep the pick 4 or would you split it if it was possible?
Well, I think we talked about this last week, Mac, that it's that kind of draft where it's not a cut and dried top 10 talent draft. It's a draft where clubs are going to pick somewhat for need, which means that the top 10 as they go will probably not be indicative of talent. So, there is value this year, I think, in splitting, but you would just want to be careful to make sure you don't outsmart yourself and do your own nuts in. But if you could keep a single figure pick and say an 18, so if you could take 4 and turn it into 7 and 18, I don't know how those picks sit, but 7 and 18 or 7 and 14.
Yeah, but whatever the points work,
yeah, then it's probably the right draft to try that, but it's a ballsy move.
And with the live trading, I think it might be that they will hold off. We won't see anything done until then. I think there'll be some manoeuvring, like we saw today with North Melbourne and that pick swap that they did.
That list manager's got some nuts, Nikki.
Oh,
I thought that was a crazy one. I thought.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just a guess. It's just like going down a crown and putting everything on black.
Yes.
So I think from what Ogilvy's done before last year with that pick trading, that it's more a wait and see of will they do what he thinks they're going to do. If they are, he's got the scenarios. Him and his team have the scenarios of what's best for us to get us what we need.
Well, don't forget we've got our Moneyball man that's done all the maths as well. So they've probably got scenarios for every occasion in Hamish's team or in Justin Reed's team. But it's going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out.
I see Vardy Magic in the chat is saying there. Dale Fletcher from the Advertiser suggesting that Lukosius news may still be possible. Oh, there you go.
Suggesting, that Lukosius
news may still be possible.
Right.
So I guess watch this space tomorrow.
Well, from the Gold Coast point of view, if Lukosius is refusing to sign a contract extension, when every other recruit so far this year has, and if he's saying, I won't, I'll leave it till next year, it would be in their interest to trade him now.
Well, I had some very reliable info, and Fiend, I'm not sure if you got this as well, but you'll know who the source is, that Luco had requested a trade home to either of the clubs, provided obviously that the deal was good, was okay, and that it could be done, and that Gold Coast were happy to do it. Mindful, of course, he's a contracted player. So anyway, that was put out there. So whether that comes to pass, but I've got a funny feeling that might all. Well, it's not a funny feeling. It would absolutely hinge all on Brad Crouch.
Well, and here's the thing: there's a fair amount of chatter today that Port were trying very hard to get up the order. Who's that snoring? Get up the order, and it might well have actually forced our hand with regards to if we thought that there was a danger of losing Lukosius to Port Adelaide. It might have actually forced our hand to do a bit of business with Gold Coast to get that over the line.
Well, they did trump us last year, didn't they? I mean, they really trumped us last year. We started off in front of them and ended up behind them. And so, if there's rumours or whispers that Port are really trying to get hold of Lukosius, then I think we will do something.
But it was interesting. He was certainly, as the information that I got was certainly that he was not fussed about which side he went to. It was whoever was able to do the deal.
And that's probably different to what we would have heard in the past, isn't it, Peter?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The first time I've ever heard him express any interest in going to Port Adelaide.
Is that just a big desperation of getting out of Dodge?
No, I think it might be a bit of a play to force someone's hand.
As in, I'll go there, so we work faster to get it done.
Yeah, that's what I would suspect. I mean, everything that I know, and you too, Pete, everything that I know, I'd be shocked if he played for Port Adelaide.
I would be very shocked.
Right.
So I think it's a play, to be honest, to mobilise a couple of blokes.
We'll see what happens tomorrow, eh?
Well, anything else to talk about? I think we've pretty much covered it, haven't we?
I think we're done, yeah.
Another hour and a half?
Well, no, we did pretty well. Hour and 20, and it would have been an hour and 10, except Macca dropped in. It would have been 55 minutes, except Donkey decided to gloat for half an hour. But it's been enjoyable apart from that.
Good on you, Don. Well done, mate.
Cheers, Macca. I was doing it for us.
Yeah, you had to, mate. You had to.
He got a few dickheads in there for you, quietly.
Yeah, but they were directed at me.
No, he did a very good Macca impression. I have to give him that.
Look, once again, I have to say thank you to our sponsors, Smith Partners Real Estate. Go up to see Ryan and the team at Smith Partners Real Estate for all your real estate needs, buy, selling or renting. The lads at Down to Earth Electrical for all your electrical data and air conditioning service needs. We've appreciated those two companies' support throughout the season. We've also appreciated the support of Tim at Hardware Unboxed. Get along to see his YouTube channel for all your geeky news. And last but obviously not least, our fantastic patrons that have supported us throughout the season. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/AFL CrowCast, or click the Patreon button at aflcrowcast.com. Don't forget, aflcrowcast.com has aggregated feeds from the Adelaide Footy Club and also the AFL, so you can pretty much use it as a bit of an aggregation tool for all your trade news. I think that's it.
We're done.
We're done.
Enormous effort on the chat tonight. Over 800. Well done.
800. Good lads.
Well
Well,
done.
they had to redeem themselves because they
Well
did
done,
a
boys and
lousy
girls.
300 and something last week. Look, thanks everyone. Thanks, lady and gentlemen, for joining me on the cast tonight. Enjoyed as always. We'll see you next Tuesday for Tuesday Night Live once again.
Bye-bye.
Righto.
Yeah, not all.
Night-o.